The first time I played Fury, I could barely beat the tutorial boss and got so stuck at the second one that I had to quit. The second attempt, around a year later, showcased massive improvements when I slayed the second boss and got hard stuck at the next one so much that I rage quit here. But now, after a year's training with similar games like Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, Star Wars The Fallen Order, and Metal Gear Solid Revengeance, I was certain that this attempt was the one. But at what cost?
Pull yourself together. Get out of prison.
So what is Fury about? In Fury, you play as a prisoner in an outer space jail that's divided into 9 planets, each having its own jailer defending the entrance to the next. The game starts as you are freed by a bunny furry and begin your journey to break free and get back to Earth. In this journey you will walk, fight bosses, listen to really great music. By the way, there is no music section in this video. I don't know what to say about it. It's really good and goes well with the game. The same case with the design in general. Yes, the bosses look really good and fit the aesthetic, and most of the backgrounds do the same. There's really nothing more to say about it. You also get to walk a little bit more, which is nice. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and start from the beginning. After a cutscene, you get introduced to the tutorial boss, which is simple. It's mostly just getting used to the mechanics. There's a lot of things you can do in this game, a lot of skill expression in that sense, but some abilities are really weird, so you never end up using them, at least in my experience. So I'm going to talk about the ones you do use, and not about those attacks that make you a little bit faster, I think, or this one does like more damage, but you never end up using it because you need to like charge it, and if you get hit, it cancels. It's just not worth it to use this kind of attacks. Your character is equipped with 2 weapons, a laser pistol with infinite ammo and a katana. Bosses do the same and have a melee weapon and a ranged weapon. Fights are divided into 2 sections. I'll call them bullet hell and melee sections. In bullet hell sections, the boss will mostly use the ranged weapon and use ranged attacks in a wide arena with a lot of space to move on. The player can run during these sections and has a dash to avoid attacks. The dash has invincibility frames and almost no cooldown, so it's pretty spammable. It does have a very short range though. You can charge the dash so you travel a greater distance, but you have to stay still to be able to do it, so you have to know when to use it, or else you'll get hit. To damage the boss in these sections, you shoot it at it with your gun. You can also charge the shot, but the enemy usually manages to avoid it. The gun can also break some of the enemy's bullets. Some of these are green sometimes and drop health. You are allowed to use your katana in these sections, but it does almost no damage since you are supposed to use your laser pistol. Still, sometimes you're forced to use melee attacks when the boss jumps at you. In this instance, you have to block the attack to avoid losing health. The attack has a shine on it and a sound cueing you to block. If you hit it right when you parry, and you also damage. If you hit it just before it lands, you stun the enemy and get a lot of damage at once. Once you deplete his health, the melee section starts. In this section, the space to maneuver is much smaller and the camera takes a closer look in response. You can only use melee attacks, but can still dash, and this is key, because the boss will still use range attacks which can only be avoided by dashing. Like this move to the safe spot attack, or this charge attack, or this area attack. During these attacks, the boss cannot be damaged. This is showcased by him being yellow. He also does this in bullet hell sections, but still the main thing in these sections is parrying. After a boss ends his attacks, you have a window to do damage. If you attack while he does his combo, he cancels it and you deal no damage, so you are punished for being hasty. Typically these sections are much shorter than the bullet hell sections. That does not mean they are easier. After that health bar is depleted, he loses a block of damage and you go all over again. The boss will have different attacks or variations of previous ones, and combos will get longer, faster and harder till the last chunk or phase, which is always a special attack. As for the player, you have 3 health chunks at your disposal. Each time you lose your health, the fight starts over from the phase you are currently on. If you lose all health bars, the fight has to be restarted all the way from the beginning. To counter this, you heal a block of health each time you finish a phase. Back to the final phase, this is when the boss will become invincible and do a really long bullet hell attack, around 2 or 3 minutes. This phase is usually the hardest in the fight. After that is done, the fight either finishes alright or has a similar thing but on a melee section style. And that's it. Now that the mechanics are out of the way, we can talk about the game now, so let's start from the beginning. The first boss is just an introduction, and even then it's pretty hard for a tutorial. There's no slow motion, hitting the button and killing the enemy sort of thing. It's actually a fully fledged fight, with 4 phases and some really tricky patterns for the beginning of the game. Still, I could get through it first try with only the use of muscle memory from previous attempts. So is it just fighting bosses one after the other? Not really. In between bosses we are forced to walk forward and we get told some lore of the story. This isn't really all that bad, as it sets up the next fight by letting you walk around the environment and introducing some of the boss's lore. But in practice you just end up pressing spacebar, which is a button to walk automatically, and you wait for 2 to 4 minutes while the game moves through forced camera angles. Since you are in jail, you can't even control your camera. In your first playthrough this is fine, I guess, but on a replay it's really boring, because you're not able to skip the sections, even though you can skip the cutscenes that play between bosses. So with the first part done, we can place it on a tier list on difficulty and also our quality. After we're done with all the bosses, I'll place them on a chart and see what that tells us. Anyway, second boss, I don't quite understand. Every review I read called this one of the hardest, when in fact it's just a small jump in difficulty. It mostly uses range attacks and you have to be quick on your feet and use as much cover as you can to avoid a barrage of attacks while barely getting your health down. You have to do all this 5 times and then get through your hardest last phase? Or you can just walk up to her in between combos and just like do half her health in 5 hits, or even really just wait for her to walk up to you. I guess it's counterintuitive because you're not supposed to do a lot of damage with melee attacks on bullet hell sections, but she literally does walk up to you to fight you melee sometimes, so I don't think it's that subtle what you're supposed to do. Last phase is one of the easier ones, got it first try. Third boss is one of the biggest jump in difficulties I've ever played in a game. This was the boss that made me rage quit in my last attempt, and for good reason. With only 4 phases, so it's not even a long fight, what makes this fight so difficult? Well, even though I just said there's only 4 phases, I lied, because this is the only boss that cheats and has 2 phases before its melee section. So it's more like 7 phases if you think about it. This is justified because he controls time, so you can reverse the damage you did to him. The fight consists of either having 100 things on the screen while shooting a reflective bullet shield that takes hours to get down, or having to avoid 2 things coming at you at the same time, something that is never done again in the game in that same style, and also it's really tricky to get used to. First phase is much easier and it's just getting parries right really fast. And the third phase of the first phase uses the hardest mechanic in the game, a bite point of view. You can clearly see what you need to do, right? Dash to the safe spot, easy. But the game is now extremely specific with your inputs. You want to go forward to the right, but you tilted your joystick 20 degrees more to the right than you should have, so that's your bad. This mechanic is the hardest one in the game because you just can't get better at it. The game decides if it likes your input or not, and coming out of 2 phases, so you're going to be low health even with all the healing around. You just have to get lucky and then do it all over 3 more times. Just get good. Fourth boss is such a downgrade difficulty wise, it makes no sense. This guy's gimmick is that his attacks are poisonous and they make your skin blurry, so it's easier to get hit, but the effect lasts like 2 seconds and has some sort of cooldown, so even with that, the nerf to your character is not that bad. 6 phases do not manage to make this guy struggle, and besides the last phase where he does an insanely complicated pattern, you're still likely to get through it since you should get to this phase with 3 health spots, so you just need to get lucky once. In retrospect, it's not a bad fight at all and should just have less phases and be less repetitive, but in the moment coming out of boss 3, it kind of breaks the progression the game had until this point. After that regression, the 5th boss gets us back into track with an actual jump in difficulty. This one shares some similarities with boss 3 in that it's really annoying to play. He has a shield that protects him from bullets, so you have to wait for him to take it out to be able to hit him, since hitting melee does literally 0 damage. It even bounces back your attacks if you hit him in his shield, so you have to be precise. Not a bad gimmick. The problem is that he refuses to take out his shield most of the time. Instead, he just sits there, waiting. After you do get him down to half, he shows his true colors, the shield is removed, and now the fight turns into parry practice. The game forces you to learn how to really parry this boss, and it's going to be a key mechanic from now on. His last phase even makes you parry 20 times in a row to really drive the point forward. But like, he also has this cool animation, and the attack it's pretty good, so I guess it's fine. Boss 6 is a mostly only bullet hell boss. You barely fight her melee because she's flying out of the arena most of the time. There are melee sections, but they are done pretty quickly and they're really hard to mess up. If the previous boss made you improve your parrying, this one makes you improve your movement, dashing, and maintaining that momentum for more than 15 minutes straight. Yes, this is a long fight. Really fun fight, even though it's really long and tedious because her health bar is immense and she moves constantly, so you can barely land a shot each time. If bullet hell section is your weak points, this fight is one of the hardest, and even if you don't struggle with that, it still is. 7th boss has a very interesting design. She fights you in this huge arena where she turns invisible and fires a laser that kills you in one shot. The rest of her attacks for the first 5 phases aren't too hard. She mostly uses an invincible parry, so you have to listen to the sound cue, which is a weird thing to do since in this game the parrying timing is not that hard as long as you focus only on the sound cue. The visual one is actually hard to get right since it's pretty fast paced, but the sound never tricks you, just hit the button as soon as you hear it. Getting that parry though is actually really hard to get right, but in this game it is more a cool bonus damage RNG mechanic than an actual skill you can improve and use to your advantage. So with that in mind, it's mostly just about being careful around that laser. But when you chunk her down to her last phase, you're in for a treat. Again, it's all about dodging that laser, and now also 70 other things are on the screen. Thank God they didn't make her melee section right after difficult, because if not for that, this would definitely be the hardest boss in the game. Having said that, this boss has a very good design, and it's really fun to play once you get the gist of it. It's a pretty good fight if you know what you're doing, and heavily rewards skill. Boss number 8 is this game version of Jet Street Sam from Metal Gear Revengeance, a purely melee fight mostly focused on parrying and quick movement. And even though he deals massive amounts of damage and wipes you out on 4 blows in normal mode, this fight fails to be the culmination of melee fighting that it's going for, by leaving too many windows to attack, and the player dealing even more damage than the boss does. This fight is so quick that you can beat it in under 3 minutes on your first attempt, which I got to do. Thankfully, on Fury mode, this fight gets so much improvement. Most attacks do half your health, and it's not only so much faster, but also the window to attack is so small that if you don't guess what Parang is going to do while he does it, you will not be able to land a single hit. Definitely the fight that most makes you feel like you dominated the game. In this last phase, it took more than the whole fight did on Fury mode, surviving only by healing with perfect parrying. Definitely the fight that feels the best to play. 9th boss isn't really a real fight as much as it is a playable cutscene where you keep moving forward, or more like dashing till you reach the end. Even if you lose a health bar, you don't go back to the beginning, so it's pretty hard to lose this fight. Once again, in Fury mode, this boss is improved by adding 2 sections in between running where you actually have to fight the boss. Once you get through the 9th boss, you get to come out of jail and land on Earth. Here you are free and are now able to walk and even move the camera while the credits play. This section is refreshing, and even though you have to wait 4 minutes, it's a real creative way to place the credits. It's entertaining, and I guess being able to actually control your character does make a difference. Who would have thought? Once the credits finish rolling, it's time for the true, and actually optional, final boss of the game. So in a game like this, a final boss should probably test you in both bullet hell and fighting sections, like a mix of the 8th and the 6th boss. Also the fact that in the cinematic leading up to the fight, we see our character flying through space, there could also be a cinematic style phase like the 9th boss has in between to mix it up. something like a Space Invaders kind of thing, since you're actually finding an AI with access to what looks like hundreds of copies of you. All of this is to say that there's a lot of potential in this fight, missed potential, because the actual boss is like the last phase in all bosses, when you can't deal damage and are forced to just stand there avoiding bullets for 5 phases, which translates to around 20 minutes of gameplay. This is so long too that it made me realize issues I hadn't seen before in the bullet hell sections, like how oversized some hitboxes tend to be. Like, how is that not a hit? Still, you do get to shoot a really cool laser. With all of that in mind, even though for a final boss it does not reach that climactic ending, it is the hardest boss in the game, and the final phase is good. 3 minutes of this, but I feel like if I hadn't beaten this on my third try in normal mode and on my first in Fury, because I did beat it, this counts. I did not die at the last possible moment, don't talk to me about it. Thinking made me realize that if this fight had taken me 3 hours to beat, I would be much more fed up with it and would not be praising it at all. So that's Fury. And how long did it take? Well, the game actually tells you. 3 hours from in-game time, so not that much at all. But if I played the game like a year ago and tried to beat it, it definitely would have taken at least like 7 or 8 hours. So it all comes down to personal experience. Lucky for me, this game has a lot of replayability, starting with Furier mode. As I have been talking about, after you beat the game for the first time on normal or what's called Fury mode, you unlock that harder Furier mode. The game itself describes it as a true challenge for masters to combat, and after you finish the game on this difficulty, you receive a message from the creators of the game thanking you for beating it in its intended way. So from this we can gather that Fury mode is a definitive way to experience this game, not just a harder difficulty. So what's the difference? Well, most of the time there's like more stuff on the screen, or the boss does slightly more damage, or these attacks a little longer, or the fight is just faster. For like half of the 10 bosses it's basically the same but a little bit harder. Not really what the game is advertising here. The bosses actually improved by this mode, and by this I mean not only being much harder but also changing the attacks enough to stay similar to the original fight it takes from, but also being like a whole new fight you have to learn. Our 8s, I already talked extensively about this one. 3, it's basically a whole new fight but with the same concepts. 6 turns into a 15-minute fight bullet hell that's actually engaging. The final boss could learn something from this. 5 is no longer an Overwatch queue and turns into a fast-paced, high reaction time fight, improving the whole thing as a whole. And 9, because it turns into an actual fight, with the face in the middle. So overall, is Fury mode different enough to be worth a repeat? I mean, the game is like 5 hours long, and that from 10 fights half are improved is enough to feel brand new for me. The rest still being at least a little more challenging, I feel like it's worth it. Something to make this even more worth it could have been like unlocking a new fight after you beat the game. Because after you finish the game on normal mode, you do unlock 2 extra fights, separate from the main story. The first is against the Flame, for me the best design in the game. Essentially it's what I was looking for in the last boss, bullet sections which switch from fast-paced parrying to dashing half of the arena in a second. Melee sections that force you to be really quick on your feet, and for the first time a 6-phase fight where each feels different enough for it to actually be there, keeping elements from previous phases while adding new concepts along the way, which leads to a natural flow of fighting. It's absolutely worth it to beat the whole game just to get to this fight. Only problem there is, this is the only case where the fight has to be played in Fury mode to be enjoyed this way. It was absolutely designed with Fury mode first and not the other way around, which I think is how the other fights were made. In normal mode this fight is way too easy, the Flame doesn't do enough damage to even notice, and his attacks are slow and predictable, so much so that the fight bursts nowhere similar with his harder, more complex brother. This fight is definitely the best one here Fury has to offer. So what's the other fight? Well, it's a 9-phase Colossus, each one being one from the 9 bosses of the game. For that reason, his station character looks like a practice tool, but even though it appears to have a really good concept, because of the length and the variety of different attacks he's supposed to do, the game is afraid of making it too hard by staying true to the fights it's taken from. So all we get is a variety of attacks that will striking or resemble to the boss. They do not call for massive memory you gather throughout the game, and it's more about having good reflexes and thinking in the moment. For the ultimate boss vibe this fight is going for, ironically it just feels like a practice tool. It's a fun fight, but if I had to choose I would always go with fights like the Flame instead. And also, if the attacks are from the Fury version of the fight, which they are, why not unlock this when you beat the game on Fury mode for it to feel more rewarding? I mean, the game takes like 4 hours to complete. It's not a crazy time investment, just missed potential, I guess. So now that we covered all of the bosses, let's take a look at how the graph ended up looking. Begin by changing the letters to number from 1 to 10 to get more understanding. Difficulty wise, except for the jump at 3, it's an overall balanced difficulty, always rising but letting the players get used to it first. Quality is kind of the same, except it reaches its peak a little bit sooner with boss 7 and then drops down till the last 2 fights, but before that, overall each boss gets better than the last, which is something really hard to do. Mixing them together, it mostly stays the same, which is good. A jump in difficulty usually means a jump in quality too, except when there's a too big a jump, then the quality stays, is more stable than the difficulty. But overall, a harder boss means a more enjoyable one too, and that's what you want in a game like this. Now that I'm reading the script out loud, I feel like I'm coming out too negative in this video, when this game is actually really good. It's one of the only boss rush games that feels fully fleshed out enough to have a story and setting and not just be a boss right after the other with no pauses. But when there are so many positives in a game like this, you are bound to mainly focus on negatives, because if not, we will be here all day, and this video is already long enough as it is. So I think that's a good note to end the video on. Thank you for watching. If you feel like it, you could drop a like. If you don't, you could even maybe subscribe. If you don't want to do either of those things, try commenting and tell me like where I can improve, how I can improve. I'll take criticism. And if you don't want to do either of those things and just sat through a 20-minute video, well then just see you on the next one. Goodbye.